Georgia, the defending national champion, right there in the mix. They have Tennessee at home in Athens coming up this weekend, and we're joined by Chip Towers, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, who we've had on before, back even when Baylor played Georgia in the Sugar Bowl a couple of years ago. Chip, obviously, Georgia has had a great year again. They had the one scare against Missouri. They have the blowout win against Oregon. But it seems like to me, because Tennessee has been such a great story, that perhaps they've been a little bit, just a little bit, under the radar. Do you agree?
Well, under the radar, I don't know. But, I think in athletics, period, you're always looking for the new guy, the new story, the underdog, as the case may be. I mean, lest we forget, until Georgia vanquished that beast that was Bama last year in the national championship, Georgia was playing that role. Now, under Kirby Smart, that narrative has changed. I do, by the way, know who the coach of Georgia is. Anyway, that narrative has changed under Kirby Smart, where now he talks about it all the time. We will not be the hunted. We will be the hunters. And thanks to the college football playoff rankings last night, they kind of flipped the script on this game just a little bit, and suddenly they do look like the hunters rather than the hunted, with Tennessee showing up in town as the number one ranked team according to college football rankings. But Tennessee has been kind of the cheek pick anyway. Before them it was Kentucky earlier in the year. Before that it was somebody else. You're always looking for who's going to be that dark horse that comes out of the pack in the front, and this year that's Tennessee.
So, Chip, how do you think that this Georgia team matches up with this Tennessee team, given Tennessee's explosive offense? Georgia hasn't really played an offense like this, but I don't know if anybody will all year unless they play Tennessee. So, as far as this year's team and the defense that they have, do you think that they can slow down the Vols?
Yeah, I think they match up better than anybody else has so far. That's kind of it's the funny thing how it turns like this. It's like I get asked that every. Do you think Georgia? You think Georgia can match up with this Tennessee? Yeah, they matched up with them last year. It was the same offense, and they match up with them this year. Georgia's defense is better by far than any defense that Tennessee has faced so far, and they're playing at home. That's tough. Georgia's lost one game in the last 5 years under Kirby Smart at Sanford Stadium. So, they match up. Now, they're not perfect, and if Georgia does have an Achilles heel, defensively, it is letting the occasional explosive play spit out of there. Last year they did that a little bit, but that's because they man coverage, and whenever you're man-to-man and you're playing in the SEC, those guys are fast and the quarterbacks are good, and they get it in there, and every once in a while, you're going to slip and that guy's going to go for 80, or you're going to bust the coverage. That happened against Florida this past weekend. You saw it. Malachi Starks busted the coverage as a safety and let the guy slip in behind him, 78 yards. But, that was one slip-up in a game full of domination. And, Georgia, the flip side can also be it can be described here with the fact that Georgia hasn't faced as explosive of an offense as Tennessee yet, but they're still winning by an average of 39, 32, whatever points a game it is. So there is margin for error in there. And Georgia's offense, flip side, I don't think quite gets enough credit. If you look at Alabama in the SEC stats, they're number one in everything. Well, who's number two? It's Georgia. So, I think it's a fantastic matchup, as the number one versus number three should be, and Georgia's at home, which bodes well for them.
Do you think part of that, I don't know if it's disrespect, but do you think part of that's just the lack of marquee games ever since playing Oregon earlier in the year?
Yeah, Georgia's schedule is terrible. It's always been, we've all, looked at, and listen, it's been terrible, but normally Auburn's not looked at as a terrible game, right? It's kind of up to the other teams to sort of hold their part of the deal too, and so some of that's not Georgia's fault, but it's a weak schedule. You've already played Sanford and Kent State in the middle of all this. And, South Carolina looked good for a minute. They popped into the rankings for a while. Missouri's been good in the past, but they're not now. You're a slave of your division. Yeah, all you can do is play who you're scheduled to play. And then for whatever reason, this kind of always been the case for Georgia. Their schedule's always kind of been backloaded. I mean, back in the day, it used to be, Florida, Auburn, Georgia Tech. You ended every year with that, and that determined your season. Now it's been flipped around a bunch of times, but Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State, Kentucky. Florida's not who you expected them to be, but Tennessee certainly way better. And Mississippi State and Kentucky have both enjoyed time in the top, not just in the top 25, but in the top 10. So, we'll find out just how good this Georgia team is over this month. But certainly everything's riding on Saturday, Ken.
The Georgia tight ends, I think, have to be, probably amongst the top storylines in this game, especially knowing that Tennessee's not, completely they're not the strongest against the pass, let's say. What is your confidence level in Brock Bowers, his ability to maybe sling it around on Saturday? And obviously the tight ends would be a big part of whatever Georgia's offense is doing.
Well, tight ends are what makes Georgia's offense go. I mean, that's what separates them from everybody else. All five of the they have 6 tight ends, but 4 of them are former 5 stars. And
crazy.
It is it's crazy and it's weird, and I don't know if Georgia's set out to do that. Let's recruit the best tight ends you can possibly get and build our entire offense around. I don't think that's what happened. It's just sort of a confluence of circumstances, but I think that's what separates Georgia from everybody else. And I saw an interesting stat today. I can take no credit for it whatsoever. I read it in The Athletic, and I had no idea. But apparently 4 different teams Tennessee has played, their tight ends had their season-high catches against them. Apparently it's a matchup problem for them, whatever they're doing defensively anyway. And the theory is that, they are hell-bent on not getting beat deep. So they give a lot of underneath stuff. And the difference in Georgia with Brock Bowers in particular and Darnell Washington to some effect is that underneath can turn out to be long distance. Brock Bowers has all of Georgia's longest plays this season. I mean, in the top 4, I think all of them 70 yards plus, 75 yards plus. That guy's a freak. But so is Darnell Washington at 6'8", 270 pounds. And what they do with them, they have at least 2 of them on the field. Sometimes they go with 13 personnel, and they run that RPO with Stetson Bennett, rolling out there. And man, that can be a pass, that can be a run. Those guys are devastating blockers, not just okay blockers. They're tight ends who absolutely dominate tackles and outside linebackers. So, that's what Georgia does. And they do that. While they're doing that, they possess the football. This is the chief difference. Everybody downplays time of possession nowadays, but what Georgia does, they don't have a bunch of explosive plays, but they eke out long drives. They lead the SEC by a mile in time of possession. Kirby said that they're not seeking to do that, but that's just how Georgia operates. They hand the ball off. They flip it to their running backs in the backfield and wide receivers on hitches and tight ends all over in the mid-range game. That keeps the sticks moving, and conversely, it keeps the opposing offense on the sideline. You're going to want to do that with Tennessee as much as possible.
You wrote about Nolan Smith. You also had a great article, of course, The Memory of Vince Dooley, which I'd like to ask you. But first, Nolan Smith and the loss and what that means to them.
Well, so it's a huge – I can't downplay it because it's a big deal. The guy was starting for a reason, and he was starting over – Georgia has one of the – like we're talking about the tight ends. It's kind of stupid the level that they've recruited at outside linebacker the last 7 years. I'm not even going to run down it, but they're all 5 stars, right, or high 4 stars or whatever. Everybody wanted them, all the way down to the freshman they have now, Marvin Jones Jr., whose father – was the legendary player down at Florida State. So they have great talent there. But, there's 2 things about Nolan Smith. He's the senior, played a bunch of wars, always does the right thing. With Georgia, their offense is really not about sacks. That they're last in the league in sacks, and they like to get pressure on the quarterback, but they're not concerned with sacking the quarterback. No, they're concerned with him getting rid of the ball really fast. And Georgia opponents are averaging about a little over 3 seconds getting rid of the football. Typically, you can't get real deep when you're doing that. And Nolan Smith is a big part of those packages where whether it means being in coverage, really good at setting the edge against the run, and then occasionally going after the quarterback. He led them in sacks, but that's just with 3. Now, flipping to that, Georgia typically only plays one jack linebacker, outside linebacker, and not a lot of them and not all the time. So Georgia has some really good candidates to get in there, including 6th-year senior Robert Beal, and then, a sophomore by the name of Chaz Chambliss. Those are going to be the first 2 guys. But there's just a laundry list of, former 5-star players that are looking to get on the field. I don't expect much of them in this game because it's way too important to be doing the right thing rather than doing something great in this game in particular.
Would you give us your thoughts? Obviously, Vince Dooley may have been the most gentleman of gentlemen among the coaching's history. Not that there weren't others, but just seemed to be. I never heard anything bad said about Vince Dooley.
Yeah, I mean, a true Renaissance man and a colossal loss to Georgia and to college football in general. Probably the smartest man I ever knew, and it wasn't smart because he was just wickedly intelligent. He made himself smart. He studied everything, and he went to his grave as a master gardener, a historian who wrote 2 books on the Civil War, a football coach who won a national championship, an athletic director whose team's underneath him. I can't cite the number, but, 20-something national championships, I think. I mean, you're talking about, swimming and gymnastics and tennis and, and football. And, he actually recruited Kirby. He was involved in the recruitment of Kirby Smart when Ray Goff was the coach, and he, was still involved with things very intimately back then. But all the sports writers you'll see were, to this day, or until the last couple of weeks, he was a man I could always count on calling for perspective. He would always answer text, call me back, and if at all possible, weigh in on whatever the 1,000 subjects were that I was going to ask him about. And I'm going to miss that dearly. But I am glad that they got to name the field Dooley Field while he was still alive. I was among the proponents that thought it should be on the stadium because he oversaw 7 different expansions. When he got to Georgia in 1963, that was a 36,000-seat facility. On Saturday, he'll be honored in a 92,746-seat building that is second to none in all of college football, and he's the reason for that.
Hey, thanks a lot. We appreciate all you bring to the table with us, Chip. Chip Towers, busy man, Atlanta Journal-Constitution on anything, everything, Georgia, Tennessee, and the late, great Vince Dooley. So Tim Brando had his